Hi, this is Muho from Osaka. I want to continue answering some questions. Right now, right outside of the window, they are doing some roofing work on the house opposite of where I live. But I hope you can understand me acoustically. Last time I tried to answer the first question out of 3 questions that somebody asked. That question was, what rules do exist for lay practitioners? What does Buddhism expect of lay practitioners? And I think there's a certain difference between the role that the rules or precepts play in Buddhism and in Christianity. I think in Christianity you can probably speak of a certain expectancy. It is expected of a good Christian that he keeps to this and this and this, otherwise he might not be allowed into heaven. But in Buddhism there wouldn't be a rule that you have to obey so that you can enter nirvana, or on the other hand, just keeping to the rules and to the precepts doesn't guarantee that you will enter nirvana. I think it's more in that way that the rules are supposed to help you with your practice. And especially if you're living in a community, in a sangha, the rules also help to regulate the sangha life. So if you're lay practitioners, you're not living in the sangha, there are less rules. And in a way you could say, well, you can decide for yourself which rules are helpful to your practice. But then there's also a certain danger there that you kind of cherry pick those rules that serve you best, the rules that serve your preferences. And actually often it's exactly those rules that serve your preferences the least that can be helpful. So for somebody who has decided that he's going to be a strict vegan for the rest of his life, sometimes, even though there's no rule that you should eat hamburgers in Buddhism, maybe sometimes eating a hamburger is what might help your practice most. But then, as I said last time, you might have a look at the Pali scriptures. I think they have 5 rules for lay practitioners there in Theravada Buddhism, and also Thich Nhat Hanh has some rules. I think it was 14, and they might also work for lay practitioners. Next to the second question. The second question is as follows. What are typical pitfalls on the way and how to recognize them? Which ones did you encounter yourself or at others? That question reminded me of 1 or 2 questions that were asked to me in German a couple of weeks ago. And somebody made me aware of the concept of spiritual bypassing. I had never heard about that expression before. So I learned about it only a couple of weeks ago, but it seems to be quite popular, or it seems to be a topic that quite a lot of articles have been written about in the last couple of years. But I will include some links. One of these articles that I commented about in German is by Jeff Brown. So he gives examples of 10 different ways of what he calls spiritual bypassing. He didn't coin the phrase, but well, he talks about what it means to him. And I think all of these spiritual bypasses are also pitfalls that you can encounter on the Zen way. For example, I will go through these 10. The first one is the positivity bypass. So think positive. Look at the bright side of life. If you think negative, things will turn negative. If before a fight you tell yourself, I'm gonna lose anyway, you're gonna lose. But if you tell yourself, I'm gonna win this fight, you will win. But what if your opponent also practices positive thinking? So I think Jeff Brown is right that that's also a trap, that you always tell yourself, well, but I should think more positive. Sometimes negative thinking is also asked for, like you're gonna get older, you're gonna get sick, you're gonna die. And no amount of positive thinking will change that. But then, of course, and that's also something that I said in German, all of these 10 bypasses have also their kind of opposite counterpart. So positive thinking, positivity can be a pitfall, but of course negative thinking can also be a pitfall for many of us. We always tell ourselves, well, sooner or later everything is going down the hill, and no matter what I do, I will never succeed. That's of course another pitfall. And that goes for all of these 10 bypasses, I think. The second one is the cerebral bypass, for these intellectuals like myself, always thinking in your brain, always trying to analyze things, think them out. And before I start to live my life, I need to understand the meaning of life. And if I don't understand the meaning of life, I better not live in the first place. You always need to have the plan laid out in your mind before you get to move, and you trust your brain over your heart. That's the cerebral bypass. But then the other bypass is the Bruce Lee bypass. Don't think, feel. Sometimes that can be good advice, but sometimes people just trust their brain not enough. Sometimes you also should make use of your brain if you have one to use. Sometimes in the spiritual esoteric scene, this kind of Bruce Lee imperative. Don't think, feel. And in Zen, people also like to repeat that. You think too much, you think too much. Well, sometimes you just don't think enough. Can also be a pitfall. Not thinking enough can be a pitfall, just as thinking too much can be a pitfall. The third one is the witness bypass. You play the neutral observer. You just observe what is happening right now. When you're angry, you just observe the anger without being angry yourself. The observer isn't angry. You observe that you are angry, but at that point you're already separate from the anger. You just observe. When you're sad, when you feel sad, you observe the sadness, and in that moment you're already in a neutral state. There is no happiness or sadness in this observer state. Being the observer, you also don't judge. You don't judge things, you don't blame yourself, you don't blame others. And Jeff Brown says that's also a pitfall, and I think it's right. This desire to always kind of separate ourselves from reality, play this neutral observer that's sitting in the last row of the cinema. I'm not the actor in the movie, I'm just watching. It's not my movie. Sometimes that's an easy excuse to escape the game. I often talk about quitting the game. I say Zazen means to stop the game, take a break from the game. But at the end of the day, you have to return to the game. There's nothing outside of the game. You can't sit back. Or at least I think Jeff Brown is right when he says, well, that's also bypass, an excuse to not take responsibility for your life. Then the fourth bypass is the pragmatism bypass. In a way, that's just the opposite. You used your practice to achieve a certain goal. Sawaki Roshi is famous for having said Zazen isn't good for anything. Zazen is good for nothing. But the pragmatist would say, hell no. If Zazen is good for nothing, then you should stop doing it. We practice to attain a certain goal. We want to be better human beings. We want to get enlightened. We want to attain nirvana. Otherwise, why would the Buddha have sat under the Bodhi tree? And why would this practice have been transmitted for 2,500 years until today if it was really good for nothing? People would have stopped it long ago. That's the pragmatism bypass. And, well, Sawaki Roshi would have said, well, that's the game. That's the game, and Zazen means to stop the game. Get out of the hamster wheel. As long as you don't practice Zazen, that's really good for nothing. It's good for nothing, what you do. So it's important that it's good for nothing. But that also can be a pitfall that people kind of brag about how long they've been sitting and how it's been good for nothing for them. That people almost wear this kind of "this is good for nothing" badge on their chest. Look at me. I've been practicing Zazen for 30 years and it's been good for nothing. No Satori. That can be also a trap to get attached to this idea of being good for nothing. Okay, next time I will continue talking about the pitfalls on the path, on the Zen path. Thank you for watching. See you again next week.